will be asking questions. Uh, this will be recorded, but don't worry, if you're not speaking, your face won't be on camera, so you won't be broadcasted to YouTube unless you do want to be and you want to be famous, then let us know later, and I'm sure that we can do something for you. But I will be asking Dr. Peter Carter questions first. And then the lovely Laura, also from Last Generation, will be asking Tzeporah Berman questions, followed by an amazing, super well-spoken supporter of Last Generation, Ben Welchner, will be speaking after to talk about who he is and why he took action. So first of all, I'm incredibly, incredibly excited to be joined by Dr. Peter Carter this evening, who is a retired medical doctor who shifted his career towards climate science and communication when he saw blatantly said the collision course that we are on currently with the climate crisis. In 2014, he served as an expert reviewer for the IPCC. If you've ever struggled to understand what's actually happening to our planet, which I often do, Dr. Carter has probably already made it clear to you. He also founded the Climate Emergency Institute, which, true to its name, has worked for years to educate the public and policy makers on what emergency really means. We're also joined tonight by Tzeporah Berman. She has stood up to oil executives in boardrooms. She's taken on politicians. She's taken to the media. And she's helped shift global climate policy and is the founder and the chair of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative, which you have most definitely heard of, a campaign that has, I know less people that are in support of this than more people, or opposite. I don't know if I said that right. But it's a campaign that's now supported by over 1,000 scientists, hundreds of cities, many nation states, and Tzeporah firsthand knows how hard it is to change power, but she also knows how to do it. So first, everyone, I want you to welcome Dr. Peter Carter, who I am going to ask to unmute. Dr. Carter, you founded the Climate Emergency Institute because the world was not listening. You saw where the science was going and how far off course governments were. To you, what is the most urgent thing you want people to understand about where we are right now?
Thanks, Gillian. Actually, the most important thing I want people to understand, and they do know, is that you, protesters, etc., you are the VIPPs. You're the very important people of our planet. You are the very best. So I do try and get that out. I do my best. And thank you very much. So, of course, it's the greatest pleasure for me then to be discussing matters that interest me with yourself. I forgot the question now.
So I wanted to know, what is the most urgent thing that you want people to understand about where we are in the world right now?
Okay, thanks. It's very simple, but it's not being communicated. Basically, it's not being communicated at all. With every single IPCC assessment since the one in 2007 and the UNEP gap reports that are very good, the IPCC has made it clear that we have a real deadline for global emissions to go into decline. And that deadline has always been 2020. The last IPCC assessment, the sixth one, 21, 22, they repeated the same thing, and they said emissions have to decline 2020, well, it was gone, to at the very latest 2025. So here we are in 2025. The science is completely definite that in order to have a good chance of avoiding 2 degrees C, let alone 1.5 degrees C, which we've long, long missed, we have to, and you're the greatest people for this, we really, really have to force our governments and everybody to understand that the science says that to avoid a catastrophic global climate change, and that's literal, the emissions have to go into decline immediately. And the IPCC uses the word immediately. So that's the number one important thing. The number two important thing, I'm afraid, is that you're certainly being lied to, and you're certainly being misled. I'm sure you do understand that what the majority of the scientists are still saying, that we can limit to 1.5 degrees C. I'm sure you understand that is absolute nonsense. Here we are in March, and actually the Berkeley Earth got March of this year as the equal top hottest March. And global warming, as James Hansen started to advise us, is accelerating. So we're in a terrible position.
You almost took the answer to my next question, but when you reviewed the IPCC's fifth assessment report in 2014, what warning signs stood out that we're now living through that maybe some people don't even realize that this temperature is changing?
Well, the ones that people do realize, and so this is 10 years ago. This 2013, 2014 fifth assessment. And they were very good and very definite on the extreme weather events 10 years ago. All of them. And they said that all of them were increasing rapidly and all of them were driven by human activities. So that was really huge in a way because the IPCC had sort of dragged its feet. The IPCC is an odd organization that tends to be a foot dragger, unfortunately. But that was very good. Now, there are two other things that were exceptionally good on the fifth assessment. The first one was food security. And I don't really think this got out at all, and I don't think it's out yet. So the fifth assessment was the first assessment to say that we had started into reduced, compromised yields of crops due to climate change, basically due to extreme weather events, of course. And they spelled it out very clearly. They said that we found that there are more regions with negative effects on their crops than there are with positive regions. They predicted that every decade that global warming continued, there would be a measurable decline in global crop yield. And of course, we all know that crop yields are not, and food security is not equal. So, of course, Africa is already suffering very, very badly from that, as well as many other things. The other thing that they were great on, and I was surprised on, is feedback. The IPCC to me is notorious for avoiding feedbacks. Amplifying feedbacks are the single most important, definite, inevitable impact of global surface warming. And the IPCC has always tended to ignore it, and they still are. I can't figure out why that is, but 2005, the AR5 rather, was very good. They said that we had a lot of carbon stored in permafrost, of course, but also peatlands they mentioned. They also mentioned very, very clearly, and that hasn't come out as clearly since, that I'll give you a quote here, that the forests were suffering because of the effects of global climate change, drying and heat, of course. And they said that on every vegetated continent, there's an increase in tree mortality and an increase in forest dieback. So that was really huge when I saw that. And of course, we know now that our forests are beginning to absorb less CO2 because their carbon sinks are becoming what the experts say less efficient. And that is another terrible event. Um, it's very frustrating, you know. I mean, I've been watching these reports from the scientists of these terrible, terrible events. And every time I say to myself, oh, well, everybody's going to get together now and everybody's going to insist that but no, tends to keep on getting ignored, except for people like Zebra, of course, who I greatly admire and is a great, what do I say, encouragement to people like myself, because she never gives up, she never quits. And that's the important thing, by the way. So never, never surrender, right? Never give up. Keep being persistent, and we'll do the best that we can to win through, at least. So, yeah, feedbacks. That's the other big thing.
Thank you so much for that. I love hearing the science side behind the actual reality of the climate crisis. I hear you so often talk about quote unquote irreversible damage and tipping points. So, can you please speak more on why action is critical right now, with the tipping points that we're currently facing?
You know, you'll tend to hear hopeful statements that, well, global warming, climate change, they're reversible, right? The very basic science of global climate change makes the situation the opposite, right? Wherever we are, we're going to have more heat, more warming coming. So everything is irreversible. You know, unless you can, you know, get some CO2 out of the atmosphere, which we need to do, but nobody's doing very much on that at all either. Um, so, yeah, I mean, tipping points, of course, due to another climate expert that I really admire called Timothy Lenton at University of Exeter. For many, many years now, he's been Mr. Tipping Point. And he's been absolutely great at explaining these tipping points, pointing out how important they are, that they're absolute huge planetary deterioration and reversibility nonsense. So, and of course, now, as you're no doubt aware, we are past some tipping points. It was years ago that James Hansen, in 2008 actually, that he made this public statement, bless him, that we really were in a state of planetary emergency. And he made that statement because he'd been watching the Arctic sea ice slowly disappear, right? The scientists, most of them, except for Tim Lenton, they say that we can reverse the melting of Arctic sea ice. Um, uh, they do this because they play with their models, basically. So you will also have heard that Arctic sea ice is now melting away faster. It's been less of a severe melt in the past 5 years, but this winter it was a record low on its freeze-up maximum. And with the Arctic sea ice going, it's affecting everything else, right? When I mentioned the feedbacks, all of the huge, enormous feedbacks are sourced in the Arctic. So we get this cascading knock-on effect of they're all making each other worse. So that is the nightmare scenario that I've certainly always feared and tried with many other people to try and explain to people. People don't like to hear this stuff, and increasingly they don't like to hear this stuff because it's very unpleasant. Now, I can sort of understand that in one way, but of course, you know, in another way, I can't possibly understand it. So this is where I feel for the protesters who are out there and doing the stuff that needs to be done. Um, uh, the real truth about the degree of planetary emergency, really nobody's putting out. So we need a lot more of that. from experts, and that's begins to happen. So that's an improvement, I guess.
That's so great to hear. And we're so lucky to have you, an expert reviewer on the IPCC, talking about the reality of what's happening. Like you said, it is incredibly refreshing to hear. People might not want to hear it, but it might be the one thing that gets people out into action. You have been so kind to be a guest speaker for us, and you're a supporter of our campaign. What compels you as an expert IPCC reviewer to support civil resistance in the face of this crisis?
To support the what? Sorry.
To support civil resistance.
Oh yeah, yeah, the yeah. Um, well, I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? I mean, it's inevitable, and I don't understand why everybody is not supporting it. It's completely absurd, right? Um, the framework, the Climate Change Convention was signed in 1992. I remember 1992 in the late 80s very, very well, right? There was a lot of worry about climate change. There was a lot of understanding, a lot of concern. And that's over 30 years ago, right now? 30 years in which we've been suffering the evil campaigns of the fossil fuel industry. And they are evil. There's no question about that now. Global warming is accelerating. It's at a record high. It's actually the highest it's been in tens of millions of years. That's the latest finding. And the same with atmospheric CO2. Atmospheric CO2 has now increased 52%, and it is accelerating. It's been accelerating ever since 1958 and for the past 5 years. And yeah, the scientists have been good on this. They've got it out. I don't know how many people have heard it, but in the past 5 years, there's been a big, big uptick in the rate of atmospheric CO2 increase. So it is delinquent, it is negligent for the public as a whole not to be doing everything they possibly can to support and help you.
I appreciate that so much. The first question I asked you, you talked about how we're lied to so often. We've seen the government spin the science. We've seen the fossil fuel industries spin the science since the 70s. What do you think the biggest lie that they're telling people right now?
Well, the biggest lie is that I guess they're saying that it's fine for them to continue subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. Now, there's a reason why that's a huge lie, and it's the most evil crime ever imaginable. It is completely unbelievable. And the subsidies are, by the way, are increasing. There's been another big assessment done by European Union statisticians, and they confirm the IMF's finding that fossil fuel subsidies from our governments have reached $7 trillion a year. Now, it's a huge lie because back in 1992, at the Pittsburgh summit, no less, they all agreed that subsidizing fossil fuels was wrong, right? And they all said, we're going to stop it. Just give us some time. We're going to stop it. And they're still saying the same big lie. And Canada, the government of Canada, is right in there with all the other governments. The governments of Canada, I think a couple of years ago, decided we will step forward and we will stop the subsidizing of fossil fuels. But what they said was an absurdity, which has been repeated for several years, is that we're going to stop inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. And you know what they did next? They sent a questionnaire around to ask people to explain and consult on what inefficient fossil fuel subsidies meant, right? That's a horrible, horrible deception. So it's a terrible lie. And we do have, of course, great organizations like the Non-Proliferation Treaty, who have as a principle, as a first principle, that fossil fuel subsidies have to be stopped. Um, I'd have to say that, and I've already mentioned it, but a convenient lie which is being shared by everyone actually, the United Nations, and I have a lot of respect for the Climate Secretary of the United Nations, also the all of the governments, but nearly all of the scientists, right? And I think James Hansen was brave enough to mention that this claim that everybody's saying is that we can still limit to 1.5 degrees C. I think he said, well, that's not really the truth. That's a terrible lie because we are 1.55 above already. We know, thanks to James Hansen's this year and his colleagues' report, that we're not going to be able to limit to 2 degrees C. 2 degrees C, which we have been fearing and trying to make sure we never got close to since the mid 1990s. We're now looking at 2 degrees C. But the interests and the governments and the scientists who are making things look nice for people, David Spratt called it, I forget the name, but it was a rather clever name. They are preventing us preparing, right, for 1.5 C and 2 degrees C, right? So 1.5 degrees C is the globally disastrous limit. And the scientists were great after the 2018 1.5 C IPCC report, which I was a reviewer on, that great report. They did. They all came round and they changed. And they said, yeah, 1.5, 1.5. That was good, right? Excellent. But now this is a very sad thing that's going on. What we should be focused on is what the governments are doing. We should not be talking about 1.52 degrees C or all of this. We should be talking about what governments are doing to us, right? They have decided that they're going to condemn us to an unlivable global warming of 3 degrees C. IPCC says it's 3.2 degrees C. So that's the worst sort of lie, deception that I could ever imagine. I never imagined something like that would start happening.
Me neither. Well, our governments are constantly lying to us, but this is probably the biggest lie that you could ever have about a livable future. Thank you so much for everything, Dr. Peter Carter. We just have another minute with you if you would like to say anything just to finish it off. But so far, it has been largely eye-opening.
Oh, okay. I don't know what to say to that. Because your eyes are wide open. I know that. I know that. The other people who have their eyes open and their minds and their hearts open, I know. Um, I mentioned a couple of things. I have a funny feeling since I've been living in Canada that I'm not really the right person to be doing this because the right people to be doing this are the people that you mentioned in a very fine way at your opening. They're the traditional First Nations Indigenous people. They have the answers. They do. I talk with them. I know them. They're great and they're still being pushed aside, right, by a colonialist type government. And that's a big reason why we're losing this planet, right? So that's the first thing I'd like to say. I'd like to mention something that Canada has done, which was really, really excellent. Um, the very best climate change assessment for Canada was done in 2019 by the Canada's Natural Resources Department, no less. And they did this assessment and they called it Canada's Changing Climate. It is absolutely excellent. It got everything in, it got everything right. But again, I don't know how much it got around. Final thing will be a bit of a downer. There was Canada is we always felt that Canada would be less vulnerable than anywhere else, particularly in its agriculture, right? That seemed reasonable. It hasn't turned out like that. As you know, Saskatchewan and Manitoba, the prairies have had some bad years, past couple of years. And in 2023, there was a research report which was entitled Canada's agricultural breadbasket is getting hotter and drier. We're all in trouble. And the best thing that we can do is shout out how bad the science and the facts are. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be sending the Canada's Changing Climate report in the chat in just a minute here so people can take a look at it after the meeting. Thank you so much, Dr. Carter. Every time I hear you speak, I'm reminded of just how clear the crisis really is. You've spent, you are the right person to say this because you've spent decades doing what so many are afraid to do, which is speak with a civil resistance group and tell the truth over and over, especially when people don't want to hear it. And the fact that you're still here, still showing up, still using your voice, it truly means the world to us. And it does give us strength to keep going, knowing that we're on the same side. So, on behalf of Last Generation Canada and everyone in this call, thank you for standing with us and for helping us understand truly what's at stake with such beautiful honesty and heart. Um, we could all listen to you for hours, but I am going to pass it over to Laura now to introduce our next incredible guest. So thank you so much, Dr. Peter Carter.
Thanks so much, Jill, and thanks so much, Dr. Peter Carter. That was really, really eye-opening. And again, not to repeat what Jill said, but it really does mean a lot to have a scientist who is backing direct action. You know, we've really seen scientists across the world basically screaming from the rooftops for decades now about something needing to change. And I think it's really amazing that you're here tonight to come and tell the truth to our community and continue to do so as much as you possibly can, because there is a lot of respect for science, but there needs to obviously be more respect for science. So I'll just introduce myself really quickly. I'm Laura. I've been with the Last Generation campaign for a few years now. I've been arrested multiple times in the name of this campaign, and of course, demanding actual climate action from our government. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here speaking tonight with Tzeporah Berman. This is an immense honor and privilege to be able to speak with her. She's been inspiring me since I began my journey as being a climate activist. She's been engaged with direct action since before I was even born. She was a key part of the Clay Quit Sound protests in the early 90s. She stood down fossil fuel giants. She's helped to negotiate the protection of millions of hectares of old growth forest. She's founded the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. She's done so many things and has a extremely long resume of pushing bold climate action. But I think to me, what really speaks to me about her is that she's also still here talking about civil resistance. She's still engaging in civil resistance. You know, we've seen other people who are now politicians, we've seen their past of taking direct action, and then we've seen them become bureaucratized over the years. But this is not the case with Tzeporah, and I'm just so happy to speak with her tonight. So welcome to our Zoom call, Tzeporah, and so happy to have you.
Thanks so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Perfect. I'll just start with this question. So you've been, of course, on the inside of this fight, facing down premiers, industry lobbyists, and trade negotiators. You've watched how fossil fuel companies operate behind the scenes. We're hoping that you could take us inside the room. What do people not see when it comes to how these companies block action?
It was such a good question. You know, first of all, I would say that one of the things that maybe really shocked me in the early days of meeting with the CEOs and senior managers of first logging companies and then oil companies is just such a reminder that people are people. You know, like I had this idea in my head that these were, I don't know, some kind of evil monsters, and you know, I was on, there's like good guys and bad guys, and I know which side of the fence I'm on, and you know, they're just people, and there are often really good people who are stuck in really bad systems. And I think that's important for us to remember, because if we're going to solve this crisis or these crises, we are going to need to reach across the fence, right? And so first of all, I would say that learn really quickly that not everyone who works in the fossil fuel industry is an evil person, right? Like there's really good people. They're stuck in really bad systems. And I was also reminded about how the human brain is works to justify and reinforce what our own community believes, right? Jonathan Haidt calls it the righteous mind in that excellent book from years ago. And I really noticed how some of those people sitting at the table, they understood climate change. Don't think that there's any oil executive out there right now, especially at a CEO level, that doesn't understand climate change. And I actually think it's true of the Trump administration as well. They're not climate deniers. They're pretending to be climate deniers while they rewrite the geopolitical map of the world. If they weren't climate deniers, they wouldn't be on a race for critical minerals and water. But my point is that they understood climate change and they would justify what they're doing in different ways. And so for example, some people would justify it, often the women in the room, quite frankly, as that, demand for energy is growing. There are millions of people in Africa who, can't even turn the lights on. We're here to turn the lights on in Africa. We need to provide fossil fuels to the global south. And and it's easy for us to roll our eyes if you know the impact of fossil fuels on the global south. I mean, I have spent time in Nigeria and with many people in communities that have been poisoned and destroyed, and then the fossil fuel industry leaves from Ecuador to Nigeria to Peru, leaving a mess behind, and those people are not wealthier and their lights are not on. That product was exported. It's an exploitation model, not a development model, but those people really believed that they were doing that. Then there are other people at the table who know that we need to use less fossil fuels and that we need to reduce emissions, but they have this notion that if the world is going to use it, even less of it in the future, what they currently use should be ours. It comes from this kind of nationalistic sentiment. And now that I'm meeting with governments all over the world working on the fossil fuel treaty, I see it all the time. Every company and every country believes that they should be the last barrel sold. And I think that comes from um, this idea of fairness. We're already doing our share over here, and it's only fair that if they're producing, we should be allowed to produce, which kind of gets to the underpinning of the structural problems we've had in addressing climate change for 30 years now, by focusing on pollution and emission and not at all regulating the production of the product, which I'll talk about probably later when we talk about the fossil fuel industry. And then, there are folks who are definitely just trying to hold on, hold on to their power, hold on to their profits, and convince the industry, convince the government, either because they truly believe that technology will save us, and there are some of those at the table, or they just want the government to believe that technology will save us so that they can have a couple more years of locking in more fossil fuel infrastructure. I often talk about it in my speeches as the last gasp of the fossil fuel industry. They can see the writing on the wall. Renewables are cheaper now at scale. There's 1 in 5 cars sold on this planet this year will be electric. So they know the shift is happening, but they're trying to get in that infrastructure as quick as possible, so we'll have longer dependence and they'll have, a longer profit margins. And so they've convinced our government that carbon capture and storage and other technologies are going to reduce emissions to such an extent that we can just continue to increase production because fossil fuels will be so clean. It's shocking how sticky that fallacy is, considering the data just doesn't support it at all. Globally, carbon capture and storage has underperformed by about 87% on the surface of the planet. It doesn't the promises that are continually made and the amount of carbon capture and storage that's modeled into things like the IPCC reports or the IEA analysis is absurd compared to what's actually working on the planet, which is very, very little. And so, we see it though in every major producing nation, whether I'm in Norway or Argentina or Canada, the government, or US, the government will say the same thing. It's okay that we're continuing to produce because we're investing in carbon capture and storage. But I've been at this now. Well, I've been working on oil and gas for 20 years, and working on environmental advocacy for 30 years. And in those 20 years, we've spent billions and billions of dollars in carbon capture and storage, and it is failing dismally as a solution. So you get all kinds at those tables, and definitely some are mean-spirited and some are just trying to lock things in, and sometimes you have the companies agree to deals like they did in Alberta when I was the chair of the Oil Sands Advisory Working Group. They agreed to an economy-wide carbon price and an emissions limit. And then as soon as the government changed and they supported Jason Kenney's campaign, then they funneled money into campaigning against the carbon price and against the emissions cap in order to turn the public against those policies. So it's what happens at that table is similar to what happens in real life. They try and exploit fear over scarcity, over price, and ensure that they have continued dependence and lock in into that dependence. Sorry, that was long, but it's my favorite question.
Well, I mean, it's
Spent a long time at those tables. I hope I learned something.
It's going from years of insight into a situation many of us haven't seen, especially us who are engaged with civil resistance, really fighting on the front lines. We're in the streets, we're taking this type of action. We haven't been invited yet into those back boardrooms. So just coming
and you don't want to be. Can I just say that before you get to the next question? Like, I had this notion that we could transform oil companies to be energy companies and renewable energy companies, that we could create consensus over some climate policy so that the government wouldn't be so torn between the interests. And I literally spent years working on that. And what I didn't realize, I think, is that these companies will never manage their own decline. They will never become renewable energy companies because the structure of these companies demands continued dependence. No one owns the sun and the wind. They don't want that infrastructure to exist because they won't be continually fed profits from our dependence on the sun and the wind. And the structure of the companies is designed to ensure that it's only by increasing production and increasing exploitation that they make their money. And they are the most profitable companies in human history. The fossil fuel industry has made $2.8 billion a day, every day, for the last 50 years. And so they're also the most powerful companies in human history. And they don't want to give up that seat of power.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So then throughout all of your work, you're now working and you're chairing the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. So I'm wondering, why did you decide that we needed something like this treaty, and what makes it different from other climate frameworks? Maybe some of the climate frameworks we've seen, decades ago that haven't panned out and they haven't worked. What makes the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty different?
The reason I launched the Fossil Fuel Treaty is in part because of my work in Alberta. I spent years trying to understand what are the policies we can support that will actually ensure a decline in emissions in production. Because we're 30 years in on climate policy, and emissions are continuing to rise. And what I realized is that we have spent 30 years creating international agreements on who gets to pollute and how much. Policies that are based on reducing emissions or the demand for fossil fuels. And the theory was that the demand will go down, emissions will go down, the price for renewables will go down, and the markets will constrain supply. But the markets are distorted by the subsidies that Dr. Carter talked about. Every country right now is trying to shore up its fossil fuel industry, even in the face of low prices for concentrated renewable power and expansion of renewable energy and electrification, because again, they want to be the last barrel sold. So they're artificially supporting the fossil fuel industry. So almost behind our backs here, we've been creating climate policy and reducing the demand for fossil fuels and having greater international cooperation on reducing emissions. And the fossil fuel industry has just been growing production. So we're on track today to produce about 110% more oil, gas, and coal by 2040 than we can ever burn if we want the world to stay below 2 degrees. In fact, we already have enough fossil fuels on the surface of the planet and under production today that if we burnt that amount, it would take the world well past 2 degrees. So the trajectory of production we're on is equivalent to about a 3.7 degree to 4 degree world. And then of course the emission decline that we're trying to achieve is supposed to be below 2 or 1.5. And so it's called now the production gap because of the work that we've done on fossil fuels. So the fossil fuel treaty is designed to address the production gap. It's designed to get countries to cooperate to stop expansion of the problem, because it's not a transition if we're still growing the problem. Our government likes to talk about how we're in a transition, and transitions take time. And every time I go to a climate conference in Canada, I end up faced with a minister who mansplains how markets work to me and tells me I need patience. Transitions take time. If we're building more LNG, if we're drilling for more oil, if we're if we're mining more coal, we're not in the transition. We're still growing the problem. And what we build today will be what we use tomorrow. So the fossil fuel treaty is designed to get countries to cooperate on constraining what we build, like with nuclear nonproliferation. For years, we thought nuclear weapons were what was going to keep us safe. And then it slowly dawned on people, because of the civil society campaign, that we had enough nuclear weapons already on the surface of the planet to blow up the planet 6 times over. And that norm had to shift as a small group of countries came together and said, no, we have to stop expanding this problem. And then that norm shifted, where people started realizing that stockpiling this thing that was going to kill us was actually not a way to security. That's true of fossil fuels today. Today, fossil fuels are our weapons of mass destruction. Last year, 8 million people died just from air pollution due to fossil fuels alone. So we need to stop stockpiling them. So the fossil fuel treaty is designed for countries to cooperate. We now have 16 nation states who are participating in the development of the treaty. We have another 10 countries who will join the technical meetings that we'll hold on the outskirts of the Bonn intercessional to start designing the treaty, and they'll join as observers. So there's 26 countries in total if you include the observers. And we're putting in front of them new trade rules, new tax rules, new debt agreements that could help countries stop the expansion of fossil fuels, because there's a bunch of countries out there like Ecuador drilling for oil in the heart of the Amazon just to feed their debt. They couldn't stop if they wanted to. Neither could Malaysia. It's 67% of their GDP is from fossil fuel exports. If we're going to untie many countries, especially in the global south, their dependency on fossil fuels, then we need new international cooperation. And big countries have now joined. Colombia, the 5th largest coal exporter in the world. Pakistan is our most recent country that joined. So it's different because it's an agreement that's built on equity and fairness, with the majority of participation in the core group right now from the global south. And it's different because it's not 190 countries by consensus, which is what the Paris Agreement is, because of the intervention of Saudi Arabia 32 years ago. That's why we have 190 countries by consensus. This is a voting rules agreement by a small group of high ambition countries, and other countries will then be invited to join. And that's how we built the Landmine Treaty. That's how we built the Montreal Protocol, nuclear non-proliferation. This idea that we need every country at the table by consensus is actually what's been slowing us down.
Thanks for that valuable insight on the fossil fuel treaty, Tzeporah. It's incredible to hear about your work. I wanted to ask as well, we just heard about your work on this treaty. You've worked with other NGOs, you've sat in negotiation tables, but you've also been supporting civil resistance movements like ours. So from your perspective, why is civil resistance crucial at this moment?
I think what we can see throughout history is that civil disobedience and civil resistance has been essential at critical moments in human history when our laws fail to protect us, when governments are captured by those who stand to benefit from the status quo. And it has been through civil disobedience, through citizens standing up and saying, no, I dissent. This is not right. That we have the right, women have the right to vote, that we ended slavery. This is one of those moments in human history where we are called to stand up. And I think it's absolutely essential as it relates to the climate crisis, because people are not engaging, because even though they see the science and hear the statistics that Dr. Carter talked about, it doesn't, there's a cognitive dissonance for most people between that and everyday life. Because unless you're living through a climate disaster, it kind of feels okay. And when you look at the psychological research, what you see is most people aren't acting because they don't see their politicians acting like their house is on fire. So the house must not be on fire. We need to act like our house is on fire, because it is. We have a responsibility, I believe. I believe I have a responsibility as a parent to be constantly raising the alarms, ringing the alarm bells, doing everything I can. And when people see you dragged away, when they see you risking your personal freedom, there's something inside us that goes, oh, they feel that strongly, something must be wrong. We need to not go about life as though everything is normal. We need to disrupt daily life as much as we can, and we need to connect the issues like you're doing, of inequality, of climate change, of fossil fuels, of the concentrated wealth that we're seeing in society today. Because this isn't just about changing our energy systems and having a new technology. It's about fundamentally redistributing power in every sense of the word power. The fossil fuel industry has led to a concentrated wealth in our society and an undue influence by a very small number of people on defining the laws and rules that exist today, on creating the structures that maintain inequality. And so I think regardless of whether you're spray painting Tesla or US Embassy pink, ultimately, what we're saying is that it's not okay for a very few people to be holding the future of all of us in their hands. And I think history will see you as heroes.
Thank you so much for those words, Tzeporah. I just have one more question for you. It's been such a treat to talk to you. And I think it really has to do with the cognitive dissonance that we're all talking about. I think a lot of people know about the climate crisis. They've seen the science, they've read the reports, they've heard about it, but to accept that truth, it's so overwhelming. And it's hard for an everyday person to grasp how the future is set to look so drastically different from what they're living right now. And you've been fighting this fight for decades. What I want to hear is, after all this time and after everything that you've been through, what is keeping you going? What keeps you optimistic about the next years?
Well, it's not one thing, right? It's a number of things. Part of it is part of what literally keeps me going is I make the time to spend time in nature. Um, I feel like it's how I refuel. And when I get really overwhelmed by the negotiations and the discussions, or the you know I retreat. I retreat back to the forests here in British Columbia where I live, and I retreat to the beaches, and that's how that keeps me going. But it's also that I don't think, Rebecca Solnit has this beautiful piece in Hope in the Dark, which is one of my favorite books, and she said something like, this isn't, we don't just get to sit on the couch and see hope. Hope is something that we create every day, and we create it by our actions. And that's what I feel. I love this work. I feel so damn lucky that I get to get up every morning and work on the things that keep me up at night. I feel so thankful, because without it, I would be devastated. I think I would be seriously depressed and gripped by climate anxiety, because every day I set out and say, okay, what am I going to do today to build hope? What am I going to do today to move forward? And the mistake people make is they try and eat the apple whole instead of taking a bite out of it. You know, we can't as individuals solve climate change all on our own, but you can take a piece. You can commit to having one conversation that day. You can commit to foregoing something in your life so that you can write a check to the last generation. You can make these commitments to yourself. And I think I'm still the generation that grew up knowing that we had a civic responsibility to volunteer, to make commitments, to do things outside of our daily life. And I think today people have a kind of underdeveloped civic engagement muscle and an overdeveloped consumption muscle, you know? Like I've heard my nieces and nephews talk about going to the mall as if it's a pastime. We actually need to spend our time and think about how we spend our time to support this work in the world, even if it's not your full-time job. And that's what gives me hope from working with people like all of you, from being in community, and celebrating progress. I have a terrible tendency in the environmental and climate movement to shit on every piece of progress we have, because every time you get a piece of legislation or you win a campaign, it's both historic and completely insufficient given the scale of the problem. So every time something good happens, the first thing we do is talk about how it's not enough. That is soul killing. Like, take a minute, people, take a beat to celebrate what we do. Pick chunks of it off and objectives that you know you can meet. And I've been doing that for 30 years. And I sometimes limped from next campaign to next campaign. But at some point in every campaign, I say, okay, that one's over. I don't have juice for that anymore. We got this. Nope, not perfect. Okay, but that's what we did over there. Got this idea, and this is where I have juice. And now I'm going to go over here and see if I can do this. So you gotta go with your life energy and with your juice, and you have to pick what that one bite that you can take, and that will keep you hopeful.
Well, thank you so much, Tzeporah, for that and for your time today. It's been, yeah, again, such a pleasure to talk with you. And I think your words are super potent and quite important for everyone here who's listening.
Thanks for all you do.
Thank you, Tzeporah. I want to switch now to our next speaker, who is a supporter of Last Generation Canada. It's been a pleasure to know this person and, yeah, spend time with him. He's here to tell you about his story on what made him join Last Generation, why he's taken action, and why he's been such an incredible supporter of the campaign. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Ben Welchner. Take it away, Ben. I might have to ask to unmute him. Sorry.
Yes, hello. I am Ben. I've been involved with Last Generation for about a year now, and I have taken arrestable action twice. Most recently, last July, I glued my hand to the road outside the Montreal airport in support of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. And I'm doing this because I am so tired of seeing nothing happen. I am 33 years old at this point, and I've spent over half of my life watching scientists raise the alarm about the climate crisis, watching them get steadily more urgent and insistent and desperate as we start seeing the harms get more and more close and then start happening in very obvious ways, and our politicians not doing anything. For the last 15 years or so, I've tried to support in all the more simpler ways that I can. I vote, I eat vegan, I go without a car. In the 2020 or 2019 climate rallies, I was on the streets in Ottawa with tens of thousands of other people and hundreds of thousands in Montreal. And I did those things not really expecting it would bring about any change in the world, because even then it was so clear that it was not. Climate change was a lot of people's fourth highest priority, but no one votes based on their fourth highest priority. And we still see that now, with just yesterday in the French debates, Mark Carney campaigning on expanding our oil and gas production, and at the same time cutting our civil service, who would be on the front lines in picking up the pieces for all the damage that causes. I did it because it helped me make peace with myself to an extent, but it didn't really resolve anything. We haven't gotten anywhere from that. When I was at the climate marches in 2018 and 2019, I was handed flyers from Extinction Rebellion Ottawa, and I didn't follow up on that at all. It seemed like they were just getting in people's faces and being a nuisance, and I didn't see how that was a path to change. I think everything we've went through and we've seen, that does seem to be the path to change. In Europe, climate movements doing these sort of public disruption events, getting in the way of business as usual, have achieved things that previous waves of the climate movement can only dream of. I'm definitely not a passionate believer in these methods so much as I am an opportunist who's getting with the winning team. The case in the Montreal airport is still ongoing, but a lot of people have had it quite a lot harder than me. When I was arrested, I was given an instruction not to go back to the airport and to show up for fingerprinting when the time came. And nowadays, when last generation people take action, they are carted off to jail, and they are held on conditions like not being allowed to be out in public with more than 3 people, or more recently with the Tesla action, not allowed to be in touch with anyone from last generation, and not allowed to do any kind of activism while the case is ongoing. And it seems like hopefully this means that we are getting noticed and we are being perceived as a bit more of a threat. That only is the case if we can do something with that momentum. For me, that means the project is not my life. I have a pretty cushy office job, but it means I spend maybe half of my evenings, maybe half of my weekends, a decent chunk of my disposable income forwarding this project where I can. And once or 2 times a year, it means taking a week off that cushy office job, getting together with like-minded people, and seeing how much we can get this cause out there with a little bit of sacrifice and a little more bravery. In addition to the arrestable activists, that means people running support, people on the sidewalks doing de-escalation until the police arrive. It just feels very silly to be at this point in the world where we're on the cusp of a global dark age and not see what we can do about it.
Thank you so much, Ben, for sharing your story about why you've taken action with the campaign and why you've gotten so involved. And before we, start to wrap up this call, I also just wanted to, give an update to anyone who's interested about what's currently happening in the Last Generation Canada campaign. So as Jill mentioned, we're demanding something that's very simple. We're demanding a climate disaster protection agency that's funded by a billionaire tax. This is the social contract. The government is supposed to protect us in exchange for us following laws and paying taxes. And as Peter, Dr. Carter, and Tzeporah have so clearly explained, these people are not protecting us. They're protecting the fossil fuel companies, and they are protecting the richest of the rich. So what we're demanding is that the government uphold this social contract. And since they're not, we are engaging in civil resistance. And what this means is, like Ben said, is disrupting business as usual, day in, day out. This spring, we are going to be launching into a phase of action where we will be disrupting business as usual, day after day. And we need all the support that we can get for this. We have a strategy, we have a plan. We're looking to engage in this phase of action and then spend the summer mobilizing so that we can keep doing actions. because as we were seeing in, the debates that just happened last night here with our, future potential leaders, climate is not on the ballot. And we're in the year 2025. We are far past the deadline for when action really needs to take place. And we're a group of people that are ready to raise the alarm on that, just like so many who came before us did in the fight and the struggle for human rights. So we have a few calls to action for everyone who's here on this Zoom. And the first would be, we need support. And that support can look like many different things. One, we would love for you to get involved in our community and to join us. Jill is going to post the participation form to this call tonight. If you can fill out this form and leave your details, you can come directly to a nonviolence training. If you're here in Montreal or if you're in Ottawa, you can get trained with us and you can join our community. If you are far away and you can't support us like that and you can't, come to our meetings and join us here in person, a really, really helpful thing would be a donation. We are up against literally the richest of the rich. I think the numbers Tzeporah gave was the fossil fuel industry is making $2.8 billion a day right now. Unfortunately, the Last Generation Canada bank account does not look like that whatsoever. We are a civil resistance campaign, which means funding is sparse. We're doing bold work. We're putting ourselves out there, and we're taking action that a lot of people are afraid to take. And this makes funding a challenge for us. So we would really just ask if it's within your means to make a donation to us and help us out. These are really all the calls to action that I would ask tonight on this call, but I would love to pass it back to Jill if she has anything else to include or to add to wrap up this call.
Thank you so much, Laura. This was a super emotional call. I really, really appreciated everyone speaking. First of all, Dr. Peter Carter, your knowledge of the climate crisis goes beyond just educating people. It makes people step into action. I have been watching the IPCC reports and videos of you on YouTube far before I became I was going to say radical activist as a joke, but it's not a joke. Before I became such involved with this work, and same with Tzeporah Berman, I have known you long before I started getting into the streets. And there, these people like you that have these platforms that are supporting small civil resistance campaigns like us truly makes the difference. And so many times we need support from amazing educated people like you so we can keep going, we can keep getting people, and we can start taking the action that we so desperately need. Another thank you to Laura for introducing and being so amazing within this campaign. Without Laura, I don't think there would be a Last Generation Canada. She has dedicated pretty much all of her youth to founding civil resistance campaigns. We all sacrifice something somewhere, as well as Ben, who is sacrificing basically everything he can, and so many other people in this call. So I'm going to unmute everyone so we can all say, or maybe Laura can help me. I'm not a Zoom aficionado. So we can all say good night. But thank you so much, everyone, for spending your evening with us. I appreciate it so much. I hope you learned as much as I did. And I really appreciate being with like-minded people. Can you do that, Laura?
Jill, I don't think we can unmute everyone because of the settings.
Okay.
But yeah, and if people are feeling anxiety about the state we're in, come and get involved with us. We've left the links in the chat below, and I hope everyone has a great night. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.